The Alpha King exiled his pregnant mate. Years later, her son challenged him for the throne alone. The night they dragged Lyra out of the palace, the moon was full. She remembered that later. Not the cold of the marble floor beneath her bare feet. Not the faces of the pack watching from the shadows of the great hall, their eyes low, their mouths shut. Not even the sound of the decree being read aloud in a voice she had loved once. A voice she had trusted the way you trust the ground beneath you, completely, without thinking, because it had always been there. What she remembered was the moon. Round and white, and entirely indifferent, hanging in the high windows of the throne room, like it had somewhere better to be. King Kalen Voss stood at the head of the hall with a scroll in his hands, and he read every word of it without looking at her. Not once. Not even at the end, when the last word had been spoken, and the silence that followed it was thick enough to press against your chest. He rolled the scroll back up with careful hands, handed it to the man beside him, and turned away. Lyra had been his mate for 2 years. She was carrying his child. She did not cry. She had decided that much. Somewhere between being pulled from her bed and arriving in the throne room barefoot, her hair still loose, her stomach already beginning to show beneath the thin fabric of her robe. She had decided, not here, not in front of them. They gave her one cloak and pointed at the gates. She walked. She did not look back at the torchlight. She did not look back at the great stone walls or the towers, or the flag with the black wolf on it that snapped in the winter wind. She walked until the cold swallowed the light behind her, and there was nothing ahead of her but dark tree line and frozen ground, and then she kept walking, because stopping felt more dangerous than the dark. She found a village 3 days later, small, poor, tucked into the side of a hill like it was trying not to be noticed. She stayed. She had no coin, so she worked, mending, carrying, whatever hands were needed. The woman who let her sleep in the back room of her house was named Sarah, and she asked no questions, which was the kindest thing anyone had ever done for Lyra without knowing it. The baby came in the first week of spring. It was a long night and a harder morning, but when it was over, there was a boy in her arms, small and furious, and absolutely certain the world owed him something, and Lyra pressed her face against the top of his head and said his name for the first time. Kale. She had chosen it weeks ago, and told no one. It meant nothing in any language she knew. It was just a sound that felt like his. She raised him in that village on the hill. He was a strange child in the best way, serious where other children were silly, steady where they were scattered. By the time he was 6, he could start a fire without help. By 10, he was helping Sarah carry water from the well before she asked. By 14, he moved through the village, like someone who had already decided what kind of person he was going to be, and was simply going about the business of becoming it. He was also, unmistakably, his father's son. Lyra saw it every day and said nothing. The jaw, the way he held himself when something bothered him, perfectly still, like stillness was a form of control. The particular quality of his attention when he was thinking hard about something, like the room around him had temporarily stopped existing. She said nothing, because there was nothing to say that wouldn't cost more than she was willing to spend. Once, when Kale was 5, he had asked her who his father was. She had answered without flinching, "No one who matters." She had believed it when she said it. Mostly, the years moved the way years do when you are busy surviving them. Not slowly, not quickly, but steadily, like water finding its way downhill. Lyra built a life the way you build a wall in bad weather. One stone at a time, your back to the wind, not thinking about how far you still have to go. Kale turned 19 on a Tuesday in October. 3 weeks later, an old woman came to their door. Her name was Elder Marin, and she had traveled for 4 days to reach them, which Lyra knew meant the news she carried was the kind that couldn't be sent in a letter. Lyra let her in and put water on the fire and sat across from her and waited. Marin was a council elder from the kingdom, from Kalen's kingdom, and she had the look of a woman who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had finally decided to put it down. She told Kale everything: his blood, his birthright, the law that said an alpha's firstborn could challenge for the throne, regardless of circumstance, if they were able to prove their lineage and stand before the pack. Kale listened without moving. When Marin finished, the room was very quiet. Lyra watched her son from the doorway. She watched him absorb it, watched the information move through him the way cold moves through a house in winter, finding every gap, settling into every corner. He didn't rage. He didn't break anything. He went very still in the way she recognized, in the way that had always been his father's way, and that stillness told her everything she needed to know. She had already lost him to this. That night she tried anyway. They sat by the fire, the two of them, after Marin had gone to sleep in the back room. Outside, the wind was up. Inside, the fire crackled between them, and the light made everything look warmer than it was. Lyra told him not to go. Not because she was afraid of what he would face in that throne room. She was afraid of something quieter than that. She was afraid of what it would cost him to stand in front of the man who had thrown them both away, and feel whatever it was he was going to feel. There was no good version of that. There was only the version where he survived it, and the version where it took something from him he would never get back. Cale was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You built your life here because you had to. You made something out of nothing, and I know what that cost you. But you chose to be here, eventually. You made peace with it." He looked at her. "I was born into this. I never chose it, and I'm the only one who can change it." It was the cruelest thing he had ever said to her. It was also the truest thing she had heard in 19 years. She let him go. He left before dawn. One bag. The clothes on his back. No weapon except the kind you carry in your chest and can't put down. She stood in the doorway and watched him walk until the dark took him, and she thought, he doesn't look back either. She didn't know whether to be proud or heartbroken. She decided on both. Cale walked for 3 days. He arrived at the kingdom gates on a gray morning in November, on foot, alone, no banner, no escort. The guards looked at him the way guards look at strangers, bored, a little suspicious, waiting for a reason to turn him away. He gave them his name. The first name, Ashvale, his mother's, got him nothing. He gave them the second name. It took 3 full seconds. He counted. Then one guard's face did something complicated. Then both guards looked at each other. Then one of them turned and ran, and the other one stepped back 2 paces from the gate and did not speak again. Cale waited. He was good at waiting. The news moved through the kingdom in layers, the way a stone dropped in still water sends rings out in every direction. A servant in the kitchen heard it from the runner and dropped a full tray of bread. A council member heard it from the servant and locked his chamber door and didn't open it for 3 hours. An old wolf, who had known Lyra, sat down on a stone bench in the courtyard and said, quietly, to no one in particular, "Good." Only Elder Marin, who had traveled 4 days to reach them and 4 days back, sat in her chair in the council hall and did nothing, because she had already done the thing that set all of this in motion, and now it was out of her hands. King Kalen Voss heard the name from his head guard. He said nothing. He stood at the window of his private chamber and looked out at the courtyard below, and was silent for a very long time. The story of what happened in his chest during those minutes belongs only to him. Cale was brought into the throne room the following morning. It was the same room, the same high windows with their indifferent light, the same marble floor, cold even in November, even through the boots he wore now, boots that fit and were his, and that he had earned, the same stone walls, the same iron sconces. He wondered if his mother had stood exactly where he was standing now. He thought, probably a little to the left actually, closer to the door, since they had dragged her in. Kalen stood at the head of the hall. He was still a large man, broad-shouldered, with the particular stillness of someone who had been in charge for a very long time and had learned to make stillness feel like authority. His hair had gray in it now, his face had more lines. He looked at Cale. Cale let him look. He was Kalen's exact height. He had his mother's eyes, the dark, steady kind that made people feel seen in a way that wasn't entirely comfortable. He had his father's jaw. He held himself like a man who had never once had anything handed to him, which was both true and, Kalen understood, a specific kind of accusation. Cale issued the formal challenge in a clear, steady voice. He did not tremble. Kalen accepted. The law required it. They fought in the courtyard as the pack watched. Kalen was stronger. He had 20 years more experience and a body built for exactly this kind of fight. But Kale was faster. And more importantly, he had something Kalen lacked. Kale was fighting with 19 years of cold, focused certainty. Kalen was fighting with 19 years of guilt, which meant he wasn't entirely fighting to win. It was not a short fight. It was not clean. There was blood on both of them by the end of it, and the end came the way most true endings come. Not with a dramatic final blow, but with a single moment when one man looked at the other and stopped. Kalen stopped. He stepped back. He lowered his hands. He held Kale's gaze for 3 full seconds, his son's gaze. He made himself say that word, his son, and then he went to one knee. The pack went silent. Kale stood above him breathing hard, blood on his knuckles, the winter air turning every exhale to fog. He looked down at the man kneeling in the dirt in front of him. He had imagined this moment 100 times since the night Marin came to their door. He had expected to feel something large in it, something that matched its size. He felt something, yes, but it was quieter than he expected, and more complicated, and it didn't have a name he could easily say out loud. He touched his father's shoulder once, briefly, a confirmation, an ending. Then he straightened, turned to face the pack, and that was that. Later, when the hall had emptied, and the courtyard had cleared, and the pack had gone to make sense of what they had just witnessed, Kale sat on the throne for the first time. He looked at his hands, at the cuts on his knuckles, already beginning to close. He thought about a fire in a small house on a hill. He thought about his mother keeping it burning for 31 consecutive days one winter, never letting it go out, getting up in the dark to feed it when it needed feeding, because that was what keeping something alive required. He thought she would have hated this room, too cold, too hard, too full of the wrong kinds of memory. Then he thought she would have loved that I took it anyway. He stayed there for a long time. 3 days later, before he had sent word, before he had even entirely decided what to do next, the gates opened and Lyra walked through them. She came alone, on foot, with a single bag over her shoulder, exactly the way her son had come. The guards stepped aside without a word. Kale had told them to do that, 3 days ago, which meant he had known she was coming before she had decided to come, which meant he still knew her better than she sometimes knew herself. She walked through the hall with its high windows. The marble was cold under her boots, but she was wearing boots now, and they were hers, and she had walked much harder roads than this, in much worse weather, and survived every single one. She found him in the throne room. He stood when he heard her coming. He was still standing when she came through the door. Her boy, her serious, steady, fire-starting boy, in the room that had tried to erase them both, and she stopped in the doorway and looked at him. He was her son. He was also, somehow, a king. She didn't have words for what moved through her in that moment. She didn't reach for them. Some things don't need to be spoken to be real, and some silences are not empty. They are full of everything that words would only make smaller. She crossed the room. He met her halfway.